Okay, so we're going to be looking at the burning of Bridget Cleary. So this was a very tragic event that happened in Kerry, in Tipperary, in rural Tipperary, very near to the town of Clonmel. I'm going to show you exactly where the village is, where it happened, and it concerns these two people that you can see in the photograph. Unfortunately, um, Bridget Cleary's face was overexposed in this photograph, and this is the best photograph that we have of her. Um, Her husband, obviously in this picture, right, this is taken around their, like a couple of years maybe after their wedding day. His face is a bit more, is a bit better exposed. It's not too overexposed. But here's a better picture of him when he came out of prison. So what you'll see that he was sent to prison for this event, and yeah, so that's him when he finally got out. As I was saying, it happened in Tipperary, right? So Tipperary is a county in the Midlands of Ireland, right? So just to the north east of Cork. And the biggest town, right, you can see where they were living, right? So it's in a rural area just to the north of Clonmel and to the east of Cashel. And it was very close as well to this hill right now. This green area that you can see, that's a mountain called Slieve na Mon. Slieve na Mon. Now, you might recognize that name, Slieve na Mon, because there are two songs called Slieve na Mon. One of them is in Irish, which is about the uprising of 1798. And the other one was written in the middle 19th century, and it's in English. And it's a song that Tipperary hurling supporters sing whenever Tipperary win. So it's probably the most famous song from Tipperary. It's kind of the county song of Tipperary. And this hill as well was always associated with the fairies. So there's a place on the top of Slieve na Mon where it was seen as the main entrance into the fairy underworld. Okay, now we're going to be talking about the fairies in a little bit more detail a bit later, but you can see how close they were to this area, right? So it would have been a place where stories of the fairies would have been very much alive. And just looking at this area as well linguistically, it would have been an area where the Irish language and Irish traditional culture was still quite strong at this stage. So people like Michael Cleary and Bridget Boland, right? So she was born Bridget Boland before she got married. They would have been the first generation who would have grown up speaking English. And their parents would have grown up speaking Irish. And the parents would have sort of been part of that generation where they refused to speak to their children in Irish. They wanted to speak to them in English only because, you know, that way they would have had a better opportunity in life. There would have been more employment available to them. So even though most people were Irish speaking, you know, all of the newspapers were in English. So, you know, literacy was associated with English. Also, the national school system, which had been started in the late 1830s, that would have been only in English. So it was only towards the very end of the 19th century where Irish was allowed to be taught in the national school system in Ireland. But before that, you know, it would have been probably the first ever time that people heard English was when they went to one of the national schools. So you can imagine, right, that this is kind of the crossover period between the old sort of traditional Irish illiterate society, right, that went before, and then the new modern, let's say, English-speaking literate society of modern Ireland, right? So it's just that crossover period here. Okay, so a lot of these old superstitions that we're going to talk about, the belief in the fairies, these would have been associated with the Irish language. And in a lot of cases, when Irish stopped being spoken as the language of the community, many of these traditional beliefs in things like fairies disappeared along with them. Okay. So Bridget Cleary was part of this young generation, right, of Irish people who actually had modern skills, right? So not only was she able to read and write, but she was a seamstress. Now, a seamstress, you know, back in at that time would have given an enormous independence, economic independence to a woman, right? So this would have been an era where, you know, women's rights were very, very limited. You know, often they were seen as just sort of the property of their husbands, and they didn't have any kind of legal status on their own, other than being property of their husbands. So she also had, you can see the sewing machine, right, in the photograph, right? This is a sewing machine from the United States. It was taken in the late 1860s, early 1870s, but she had one of these sewing machines, right? So she wasn't making dresses by hand. She had one of these sewing machines. Now, again, that would have been, you know, unheard of. Remember, right, that the famine, right, the famine had just taken place, for example, hello, did somebody just join us there? Alex?
It's me, Angela.
Okay,
Oh
Angela. God. Angela, how are you?
Sorry. My brain is so busy. I forgot again. Yesterday, I forgot about English class.
Okay, no worries, Angela. We're happy to have you with us anyway. It's myself and Media today's here. So anyway, just to go back, we're just talking about this event, Angela, that happened in Ireland, in Tipperary, in 1895, actually was the year that it happened. And it's the burning of somebody called Bridget Cleary. Now you can see the book, right? So I'm basing a lot of what I'm telling you tonight on this book by Angela Burke that came out in the 1990s, right? This is the front cover of the book. And it's about the burning of this woman in 1895 in a small town in County Tipperary. You can see a picture of Bridget herself, right, with her husband, Michael. Bridget was born Bridget Boland, and she was born in the same village as Michael Cleary. And she was 26 when she was killed, when she was murdered, right, when she was burned to death. She was burnt to death by her husband, Michael Cleary, and also by members of her family, by her father, by her aunties, by her first cousins, and also by Michael's extended family. So, you know, there was about maybe nearly 20 people of the extended family of the Bolans, and then her husband's family, the Clearys, present at the burning. And it took place in County Tipperary, right, in a small little town called Ballyvadla. Okay, so I was kind of talking about, you know, Bridget was relatively economically prosperous for the time, right? So she worked as a seamstress, right? So she worked at home privately, making dresses, which were sold in Clonmel, for example, in some of the clothing shops. And, you know, to have enough money to afford a sewing machine at home, you know, was meant that she was part of this really new, prosperous economic class. Now, normally women, you know, weren't economically independent, but Bridget Cleary was, you know. So she had her own money. Not only did she have her own money from selling the clothes that she made, but also she kept hens, and she would sell the hens eggs, right? So the hens were laying eggs. This is something that a lot of families would have done at that stage. Now, they didn't have any children. And this is one of the things that brought suspicion on Bridget at the beginning, right? So had she been a mother, I think people would have been a lot less suspicious of her, right? You'll see what I mean by suspicious of her a little bit in a moment, right? But I think, you know, unfortunately, in those times, if a woman was infertile, or even if her husband was infertile or impotent, or if for some reason they weren't having children, suspicion was brought on the mother, or the wife in this case, right? So why doesn't she have children? Because, you know, they would have been thinking, oh, maybe she was in league with the devil, with demons, with you know, there's a lot of stories about people selling their soul to the devil, or selling their firstborn to the devil if they could get wealthy, right? If they could get rich. Okay.
Ooh.
So, you know, like the fact that she was relatively economically well off for the time, and she didn't have any children, this got people talking, right, around the area. And not just the local people, but particularly people in her own immediate family and in her husband's family. Her husband, though, was relatively well off as well. Her husband's profession was that he was a cooper, right? So a cooper is somebody who makes barrels, okay? Now, this would have been an extremely skilled job, you know, a job that would have been very highly paid for the time, in comparison, let's say, to agricultural laborers, like unskilled agricultural laborers. They would have had, you know, 3 or 4 times the wage of an unskilled agricultural laborer. And in Clonmel today, you have the company Bulmers and Magners. Now, have any of you heard of these two alcoholic drinks? Yeah. Angela, I see you nodding your head there.
Yes.
Yeah, Bulmers is lovely, like on a sunny day, isn't it? A pint glass, a bottle of Bulmers or Magners with a pint glass with ice. It's beautiful, right? So they brew it in Clonmel. You can still see the factory there today. So that's where Michael Cleary worked as a cooper, right? So now they still age the cider in wooden barrels, but now it's all done, you know, by machinery. It's all, you know, they don't use coopers anymore. So the barrels aren't made manually anymore. But anyway, that's where he was working, and he was making, as I said, a lot of money. Now, remember, right, I was talking about, you know, that Bridget Cleary, we're not certain of this, but she was probably the first ever English speaker in her family, or from the first generation of English speakers in her family. Her mother would have been brought up as an Irish speaker, right? So an Irish monolingual speaker there in South Tipperary. And her mother would have had, you know, broken English that she would have learnt, you know, possibly from some schooling that she had. If we don't know how much schooling she had, but there was a national school in the area, but we don't think that she attended it for very long. But you know, in the census of 1841, her mother is listed as being illiterate. Okay, the mother of Bridget Cleary. But anyway, we know, right, that her mother was well known around the area as a ban fiasa. Now that word ban fiasa literally translates into a woman of knowledge. So that's how you say woman in Irish, right? Ban, B-E-A-N, and fiasa means of knowledge. So what was the ban fiasa? Well, Mná fiasa or a ban fiasa were, you know, they were the witch doctors, or they were the healers of the time. So if you were sick, you know, people didn't have any kind of money to go to a doctor, right? In fact, one of the reasons why UCC was opened up in 1846, right? That's when UCC first opened its doors, was to train doctors for the Catholics of Ireland, for the ordinary Catholics of Ireland. That was one of the principal points. You know, the way on the UCC crest, like on the sports team's crest, you have a skull and bones. So this comes from the day, like, when UCC was just a medical school. It was primarily a medical school. So it was only like towards the second half, towards like the 1860s, let's say 1870s, that access to medical doctors locally became available to ordinary people in Ireland, right? And even then it was still relatively expensive. So before this time, right, in the time of Bridget's mother, if you got sick, your only option was, you know, to go to the local witch doctor, go to the local apothecary, right? Now, there were men as well who knew about, you know, medicinal herbs, and who knew about healing plants and all of this, but almost all of the folklore that we have about these people were women, right? So we know that there were one or two men who did it, who were healers as well, but it was almost exclusively women. Okay. Now, did something like this happen in your countries, in Argentina and Russia? You're from Russia, Angela?
I'm from Latvia, but
Latvia.
I'm Russian.
Oh, you're okay. You're Russian from Latvia. So do you know in Latvia, or maybe with your ancestors when they in Russia, did they have this kind of practice as well? Would they go, like, was it the same for, you know, people who are relatively poor in Latvia and in Russia or in Argentina, that they wouldn't have enough money to go to the doctor, or there wasn't any doctor available, and that they would go to the local kind of witch doctor for help? Would that would happen? Yeah.
Who first answer? Maria Teresa, you first.
Okay. Well, yes, in Argentina that was the case, because in the rural area they didn't have any access to doctors, so they went to the healers, and our healers were more related to our first people, the aboriginals.
Yeah.
Well, it is related to them. They knew how to heal.
Yeah. And Angela?
So I want to say, for example, everyone in Latvia, if you speak in Latvia, in Russia, everyone allowed to go to doctor. So for example, they don't need to pay so big money, what we do in Ireland, for example, yeah. But sometimes the doctors can't give you answer. For example, like my mom, she went to Latvia special to find what's the problem with her legs. In Ireland, nobody know. In Latvia, nobody knows as well. So she went to one old man. He's like work with the energies, you know, like traditional medicine, but like he work with the energies. He will just do something like that after give for her some drink, and yeah. So that is popular in my country.
Yeah, I think people as well today, like I was talking about in the 19th century, but like I think this kind of medicine today is, you know, people are really getting interested in this again. You know, and also we know that a lot of the herbs, right, and plants that were used in traditional medicine for curing various illnesses, we know that they were effective because the active ingredients from those plants are being used today in, you know, in the kind of conventional medicine. So like, for example, there is a plant called, in English, it's called yarrow. In Irish, it's called aher talun. And in Spanish, I believe it's called, is it, well, the Latin name is Millafloria. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I will check that in Spanish.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah, Millaflor. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the name is in Spanish. Anyway, it's also there's a mention of Achilles in the Latin version of this plant. Okay, but anyway, we know that in this plant, the active ingredients that it has, now, it was traditionally used for stopping bleeding, and it was used as an anti-inflammatory, right, to stop swelling. And it also had powerful antiseptic powers, right? So this plant, yarrow, is how you spell it in English.
How do you spell the name?
Yarrow,
in English?
Yarrow.
Okay.
In Russian, that is подорожник.
Okay. Okay, interesting. Anyway, this plant has been used in traditional medicine for treating wounds, for stopping bleeding. Its active ingredients, one of them is similar to the active ingredient that you have in aspirin. So it was used for generations in traditional medicine, and it's still being used today, but in conventional medicine, right? So we know that a lot of these, you know, traditional herbal remedies were effective, but also there are many of them, right, that they worked because of the power of the placebo effect. Okay, so the placebo effect is, you know, if you really believe that something is going to help you, right, it makes it more effective, because, you know, the human mind is very powerful, right?
Yeah.
And if you talk to any doctor as well, you know, if a patient, sort of whatever illness they have, if the patient really wants to fight it and really wants to recover and get better, the chances of them recovering increase enormously, right? So we have this, we know conventional medicine tells us, right, that the power of the mind and the placebo effect is extremely powerful. So that was maybe Go ahead, Angela. Sorry.
That is very interesting. I just now wondering, for example, in Latvia, the same in Russia, younger people, and the same like my age, the people don't go to the doctors. They use the traditional medicine. So because we that coming, you know, from the, I don't know, from the roots that coming from our blood. So the firstly we do we self, only after we see not result we go to doctor.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. Actually, at the moment in Galway, I'm studying all about traditional medicine, and traditional medicine in the west of Ireland, like in the amongst the Irish speaking people. And, you know, there's a huge amount of knowledge that they had about the medicinal effects of various herbs. And a lot of this knowledge, you know, people had in, you know, all across Europe and perhaps all across the world as well. So that was one plant. Is it Mila Foya or something like that? Did you manage to find it, Maria Teresa?
No, because I don't know how to write it in English. Can you repeat?
Okay.
Because I couldn't understand.
No problem. I'll write the word just
okay.
on the chat.
Thank you.
There. Yeah, no worries. So just put it in the chat now. So yarrow is
yes. Okay.
is the name of it.
Okay, just a minute. Milenrama.
Okay.
Thousand. Yes.
Okay, so here is the Latin name for it, you know. So that's what I was trying to translate it, you know. Foya. I was saying like as a guess, you know, from the Latin word for it. But anyway, it's you can see that the Latin name refers to Achilles as well, because the legend is that Achilles used to use this plant, this herb, yarrow, to cure his soldiers when they got injured. And we have the same story about Cuchulainn, right? So Cuchulainn and Achilles are kind of maybe related. They possibly came from the same Indo-European source. But in Irish, we also call it Chris Cuchulainn, right? So, or Cuchulainn's belt. So he used to use yarrow too to cure his soldiers if they got injured. So it stops blood flow. So if somebody's bleeding, it helps to stop the blood flow. It's also got powerful anti-inflammatory properties. And it also operates, or it's got the same active ingredient as aspirin. So it's a very powerful one. So we know that there were lots of plants, you know, that had very powerful medicinal effects that are still used today. There's a lot of this actually in Ireland. In fact, I picked some just last weekend. We found some just by the side of the road. Normally it doesn't bloom past the middle of November, but I saw some flowering on the side of the road when I went for a walk just last weekend. And anyway, the place where the name comes from is because, you know, its leaves look like they have many different leaves on it. I don't know if you'll be able to see from here, maybe when the picture yeah, you can't really see it there, but anyway, the leaves are very tiny, and it looks like there's millions of them. You can kind of see it there, but anyway, that's yarrow. So the reason that I mention that, right, is that these women, right, these ban fiasa, right, or women of knowledge, mana fiasa, they were where people would go to get their cures. Now, in the Irish tradition, and similar to what you were saying in Latvia as well, Angela, people didn't understand why some of these medicinal cures worked. So what would we do to explain it? Well, in Ireland, we used the fairies to explain it. All right. So we thought, well, if somebody has the power to cure people, they must be getting this power from the fairies. Okay, so Bridget's mother was associated with the fairies. Okay, that she was in league with the fairies or using the fairies to help her to cure people. Okay, and there's also one belief that's common among healers, not just in Ireland, but I think in many other countries as well, that if you heal one person, then another person gets sick. Okay, so it's like there has to be balance, right? So if somebody has let's say, a very bad infection on their lungs, right? And you go to a healer. So the healer can, you know, use some spells and use some herbs and whatever she has available to help you, but somebody else will get the illness, right? So there's that tradition. So even though these traditional healers, these traditional Manafiasa, were taught to, first of all, to, you know, to just be helping people, but somebody else got hurt. And also, by the same way, they could use their powers to hurt people. Okay? So, and also, as well as using herbs, you know, they might put spells on people. Okay? So they would have, you know, maybe words, special words that nobody understood that could be used to create a spell and maybe put a curse on somebody. So there was a lot of suspicion about these Manafiasa, right? So remember, that was Bridget's mother. And, you know, here's a modern day, this is a photograph, right, from Cork of a modern day apothecary, right? So people still go to these places to get traditional cures, but they don't rely on magic, you know, anymore. It's kind of, you know, it's more based on science. But in the 19th century, they would go and they would use these kind of places, right? So this is a fairy fort or a fairy ring. Okay, now these places are actually archaeologically, they have a connection with Iron Age peoples, right? So the Iron Age Celtic peoples who came to Ireland, let's say from 1000 BC to, you know, approximately 200 AD. They were built by those people, right, as forts. So this is where the fairy forts came from. Okay, so they were originally protective forts that were built by human beings. But people at this time, right, in early 19th century Ireland, associated these archaeological remains from the Iron Age with the fairies. So they thought that they were built by the fairies. Okay, now we know that they weren't, right? They have nothing to do with the fairies. But at the time, people did think that they were associated with the fairies. So people like Bridget Cleary's mother would go here and she would invoke the help of the fairies in order to perform her cures. Okay, now Bridget's mother was dead by the time this whole event happened. Okay, you see, these are the kind of things, this is the way that people imagined people using the fairy forts in the 19th century, right? So this is a drawing from the 19th century of people who went away with the fairies. Okay, so this is something that fairies were often associated with, that they wanted to kidnap human beings, right? Now, why did they want to kidnap human beings? You can see, right, that this guy is being taken off with the fairies and his friend is trying to stop him. Now, the reason for this, right, was that the fairies, they were originally angels. Right, this is the story when if you look at the connection between the fairies in Ireland, supernatural beliefs in Ireland, and Christianity. So the fairies were originally angels, right, who sided with Satan during the war between Satan and Saint Michael. Okay, so you know that there was that war between Saint Michael and Satan. So certain fairies descended from these angels, right, who took the side of Satan in the war. So they weren't evil enough to send to hell, but they couldn't stay in heaven either, right, because they had rebelled against God. Okay, so they were left in this, what we call in Irish, an sail ella, the other world. They were left in this kind of limbo zone between heaven and hell, which was sort of in the same general location as the earth, but in another dimension. right? So only special people could see the fairies. Now, the fairies always were trying to kidnap human beings, because if they had more human DNA inside them, right, if they were able to breathe with humans, then it meant that their chances of getting back into heaven in the future were increased, right? So the fairies were always trying to steal human children, human adults, particularly any adults that were good looking, right? So the more beautiful you were, the more attractive you were to the fairies. Okay, so they didn't want old, decrepit people. They wanted young, beautiful people. And that is one thing that a lot of people said about Bridget Cleary, that she was very beautiful. Okay. So here are some more just pictures to give you an idea, right, of how powerful belief in the fairies is still even today. Okay, now this is a picture here, right, of someone tying some votive offerings to a rag tree, right, to a fairy tree. Now we have these fairy trees all around Ireland, but particularly in the west of Ireland, where people still hang on to the more kind of traditional beliefs. Here's another picture of a fairy ring or a fairy fort with some hawthorn trees or fairy trees in the middle. So the hawthorn tree in English, it produces sort of white flowers around the 1st of May. So sometimes it's called the May bush or the May tree as well. And this bush was very powerfully associated with the fairies. It was seen as the place where the fairies would live, the favorite tree of the fairies. And it was very bad luck to interfere with this tree in any way. So, you know, people today, they still, like, if you're sick or if you need some kind of supernatural help, people will go and they will tie a belonging from the person who's sick or the person who needs help to the fairy tree, and they will request help from the fairies. So that's what this man is doing here. This is one of the most famous fairy trees in Ireland where this picture was taken. It's up in County Meath. And yeah, you see, you know, this is how people imagined the fairies in the 19th century, that they would use the hawthorn trees as the place where they would live, as a way of finding their home. So you never should interfere with the hawthorn tree. That was the belief that was around. Sometimes the fairies are depicted as being the same size of adults, right? So you see often, right, Hollywood fairies are very small. But there are other types of fairies, for example, the banshee, which is the same size as a normal human. They look like relatively like normal humans, okay? So they can be very small, but they can be the same size of humans as well. You can see in this picture, you know, these fairies kind of look the same size as other humans. And they're dancing around, you know, some sort of fairy ring. So these were the beliefs that were going around at the time. Okay, now there were other types of fairies as well. So the word for fairies and supernatural creatures in Irish is called an ish-she, right? And so there are different creatures that are part of the she, right? So we spell that in Irish S-I accent. In English, it's often spelled S-H-E-E, like the banshee, right? So banshee just means the fairy woman, right? But the puka was another type of fairy. Now, the puka was a lot more malicious than other fairies that you might be familiar with, right? It was seen as, you know, whenever you hear the puka mentioned in folklore, you know, it's trying to harm people or trying to kill people, trying to steal babies, trying to kidnap people. Okay, so there are different classes of fairies, and some of them are very dangerous, the puka being one of the most dangerous ones. Okay, so the puka kind of looks like a goblin when you see it, or like a large kind of rat or something like that. That's how people imagine them. Okay, sometimes the puka as well looks like a horse, you know, with a black horse with kind of horns and red eyes, as you can see. Okay. And here's another way that people would, you know, imagine the fairies living in trees, you know, that there would be doors into the trees, right? So these were all the beliefs that were going on at the time in South Tipperary in the 19th century. Here's another fairy ring. You see the hawthorn tree. And, you know, you will see these kind of hawthorn trees in the middle of farmers' land all over Ireland. And farmers are afraid, even today, to interfere with them. In fact, there's a famous story of a hawthorn tree that lies somewhere in between Cork and Limerick. And they were building the main road from Cork to Limerick in the 1990s, and the original route of the road was supposed to go through a place where there was this old fairy tree, and there was a huge campaign to stop them from cutting down the fairy tree so that the road could go through it, and the campaign won. So the route of the road had to be diverted by about 50 meters in order to miss the fairy tree, right? Because, you know, the builders of the road just didn't want to be responsible for cutting down this hawthorn tree, and therefore, you know, to be the target of the wrath of the fairies. Okay, so guys, we'll take just a brief break there, and we'll get a cup of tea or something, and then we'll finish it off. Okay. So I'll just stop sharing there for a second. Okay, so I'll talk to you shortly again, okay?